All right, Zach Blair is here, fresh off a morning at TPC Toronto. You also on Monday qualified for the U.S. Open, so a big congratulations to you for that. What is it with you and that golf course in Springfield? Because I believe you've qualified there before as well.
Yeah, a couple of times. I don't know. I mean, I it's like very, very old. It's not super long. I can get to both of the par fives. And I think it's just like a super execution based golf course. It doesn't take a ton under, like a ton under par to get through most of the time. If you shoot a couple of 67s, you got like a pretty decent chance. I think this year I shot 68, 68 and got into that playoff. So that's always usually kind of right there. And you're kind of just always in it. You got to stay away from mistakes. And, like I mentioned, it's not some course that you got to go shoot 10 or 15 under par.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, I'm glad you made it into the field with Oakmont because I don't know if I know you've been there before, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on the golf course. But um, I think it's a golf course that, like, sneakily, and this isn't always the case with US Open venues. I think it's a golf course that is actually pretty accepting to a lot of styles of play. When you've played Oakmont in the past, I know you mentioned to me off air, you've seen it a couple times. What were your impressions on the golf course? And I'm kind of curious, like, because I know that you care about architecture in the way that I do, but when you play a golf course like Oakmont as a guest and you're like just going there to check out the golf course and like knock off an awesome golf course and see its architecture, do you think about it differently? Like if you're just playing around like that versus how you are going to have to play the golf course in competition?
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming next week it's going to be set up a little different,
Than you've
than it is
seen.
kind of day to day. Obviously, the rough will be, a lot different than it typically is. Especially the couple of times I was there. Um, and usually when you're going to see a golf course, you're maybe only playing it one or two times. uh if you play well, you're playing it 4 days in a row, to all the different pins, and you're kind of seeing everything that the course has. They're changing up tees, and you're getting a bunch of different pin positions, and they're really kind of showing you the meat of the golf course, I guess. But yeah, I definitely thought the first time I went there was uh man, probably like 2013 or 14 or something like that. I think I was playing the Sunny Hannah Amateur, and me and my dad went over kind of a day early and went and played. And I just remember it being really, really cool. I played it a few years later, kind of on the same trip, playing the Sunny Hannah. Went over with another kid that was playing in the event. And again, just being like, okay, like this place is pretty neat. Very old school, obviously. But like you mentioned, I think it's got sneaky. You don't have to hit it, the furthest. You got to just kind of do a lot of things really well. You got to keep the ball in play. There's a bunch of, like you look at the scorecard, and there's definitely holes where people are going to have wedges and short
Oh
irons,
yeah.
and
Oh yeah.
which again, like, isn't always the case, especially in some of these, U.S. Opens over the last couple of years. You maybe get a couple of them, but there, you probably have like six, 6 or 7 wedge opportunities, I would say, if you're counting the par fives. So just got to keep it in the short grass, and get it on the green, and then somehow get it down in two.
100 well, just to give more credence to what you're saying, I already told you off air, I work in, like, the data space, and a lot of what I do is I'll map out the golf course and then use that data to predict what types of skill sets I think are going to work the best at that golf course. And in terms of the amount of wedge shots that you're gonna have at Oakmont, it's like double, let's just say Quail Hollow, for
Yeah.
example, or double even a place like Augusta National. And the other reason why I say I think it's going to be a little bit less distance biased, as some might think at a traditional US Open, is that, like, you can run the ball up at Oakmont. Like, a lot of those greens are super open in the front, kind of in the same way that Winged Foot is, and, like, I don't know how much time you spent at Winged Foot, but that, to me, is kind of the golf course, at least visually and architecturally, that comes to mind in terms of, like, the fairways are quite narrow and the rough is very thick, and you're still gonna have your fair share of long irons, but, like, you look at the US Open leaderboard and, like, it's still Patrick Reed and Webb Simpson finishing top 10, and the reason for that, I think, is, like, a lot of the front areas of the greens, you can run the ball up, and you don't necessarily need to have that, like, Rory McIlroy, I can
Yeah.
hit a moon ball with a 3 iron 230 yards. Like, you don't always need to have that shot at Oakmont. And, if you're like a big architecture guy and you're used to playing great golf courses that have really interesting green complexes that you don't see often on the PGA Tour, like, I actually might think you may have a bit of a strategic advantage there
Yeah, I mean, the greens there are definitely different than what you're gonna, see 90% of the
of the
time.
time on the PGA Tour.
Yeah, you're gonna get a lot of those, week in, week out, you see a lot of hole locations that are pretty inside the hole from, like, a majority of the putts inside of 5 or 6 or 7 feet. Um, I'm sure, especially with some of the new pin locations they have with the green expansions and everything they've done the last couple of years, that you probably have some pretty uncomfortable, like, 5 or 6 footers that aren't necessarily inside the hole.
Well, I was interested too because, like, you played well at Pinehurst last year. Like, you finished top 30 at Pinehurst, and Pinehurst is an even longer golf course than Oakmont. The missed fairway penalty is going to be different. Like, you're going to need a little bit more pure strength, I think, out of the thick rough at Oakmont, as opposed to, like, some of the luck that you may able to get on the Wiregrass. But what did you remember about Pinehurst last year? And, like, why do you think you were able to find success on that specific USGA setup?
I think I've always excelled a little more in setups where there is kind of a premium on, uh, there's that fine line between, okay, I hit a good shot and I get rewarded versus I didn't quite pull it off and now I'm penalized. Again, I don't think it's something that you see on the PGA Tour that often.
Yeah.
Everything's kind of brought together versus, at a US Open, typically I would say it gets kind of spread out a bit more, and the margins and the penalty for missing shots becomes a lot different than a week in, week out setup. So, just tried to kind of stay away from trouble and, hit a bunch of greens. And, I feel like I had a pretty good week kind of chipping and putting, or at least decent. Um, and yeah, that's a place that I've always enjoyed. I've played a couple US Opens there. And it's a really good test. I think you got to do everything pretty good. And yeah, I'll be pretty interested to see next week, based on the videos and the things that people are talking about. And it seems like it's always the case that people are always talking about how crazy the rough is, but it really does sound like the rough next week is kind of like, it's one of those places that's kind of like Torrey Pines when the rough gets really, really crazy thick, where it's like
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter if you're like that strong. Like even the huge guys are having to chip out a little bit. So I would
Yeah.
assume, uh, especially just based on how that golf course is at Oakmont, there's going to be times where it's kind of not worth, even if you can get it out of the rough and, kind of go for the green. It's kind of like, well, is 35 or 40 yards out of the rough on the next shot better than just kind of like pitching it out to 120? So, if they set it up the way that I'm hearing they want to, I think it'll really just be there's like a premium on actually like hitting fairways and doing the right things into greens.
I couldn't agree more. Not that you need me to tell you what is going to matter next week, but I'm seeing and hearing and observing the same things. And the thing that I keep coming back to, that I keep hearing over and over again, is like, this is a very proud membership that prides itself on the difficulty of its golf course. Like, when it was designed in 1903, this was designed to be the hardest golf course in the world, and
Yeah.
it was a one-off. Like, Henry Found's like, this is the only golf course that he ever created, and it came well before, like, National Golf Links of America and Pine Valley and all of those, like, master works of all the George Thomas golf course on the West Coast. Like, Oakmont came before all of those golf courses, and its identity for 120 years has been hard, that we're
Yeah.
just the hardest golf course on the planet. And historically, it's hosted, like, I think 5 to 7 US Opens, and it does have the highest average winning score compared to other US Open venues. The thing that I think is going to define the week from a scoring average perspective, and their longtime pro, Bob Ford, said this, and I thought it was well said. He was like, if we get rain, it's going to be 5 under par. And if we don't get rain, it's going to be 5 over par. And that feels kind of right to me. And I'm seeing, unfortunately, a decent amount of thunderstorms early in the week, which is what happened in 2016 too. Like, 2016, the winning score was like 3 under par. And the members were complaining that it wasn't half as hard as they usually see on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Yeah. There's nothing you can do kind of when the rain and that stuff becomes like the story and the factor. But you never know. With the thunderstorms, it could kind of be some little skiffs, or it could be a crazy. Yeah, back in 2016, it was crazy. Like I think
Yeah. Did you play in 2016?
no, but I remember kind of watching it and everything like that. I mean, they had like a full day washed out where it rained all day, and it rained a bunch of times, leading up to the week. So maybe they can get lucky and just kind of get some afternoon showers and stuff like that, and stay away from hopefully some of the really big ones. But I know I would assume that in this big project that they did the last couple of years, that they did add a bunch of drainage, at least to the fairways and stuff like that. So
And
it's not.
opened a lot of it up. So, like, the driving quarters, at least visually, like, you've got some real room off the tee, but then sometimes that plays into the bombers even more, because you just have the galleries trampling down some of the big miss spots, and then the guys that missed the fairway by 1 yard end up being in a worse spot than
Yeah.
the guys that miss it by 30 yards.
Yeah, yeah, that I see that quite a bit, just week in, week out too. It's not always how
Oh yeah.
close you can be to hitting the fairway. It's just, where to be in the right spot and missing in good spots. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm excited.
Is there anything, last question on, well, a two-part question, and then I want to talk to you about Tree Farm too. But um, do you do anything different prep-wise for US Opens? Like, do those weeks feel distinctly different for you from the average PGA Tour week? And then, are there any golf courses that Oakmont reminds you of as well, that you feel like we haven't already mentioned in our conversations about it?
Just in terms of prep, I think it's just, obvious that the golf course has just a lot more. It's not super like face value. You
Yeah, it's a
gotta.
lot more thought required.
Yeah, yeah. Again, and most normal weeks you could kind of go out there like, I was first alternate, or I was an alternate this week and got in last night at 7 o'clock. Never saw the golf course, and it's
Yeah.
not like I played great today, but was able to kind of get it around and shoot even par. Um, that would be really hard at you know at Oakmont or even Pinehurst, or any most places where they kind of would host a U.S. Open, it would be really really difficult to know all the little spots where it's okay to miss, even on greens, just mainly because the green complexes are so much. There's just so much more going on. You might feel like, oh, I hit this green, I'm in a good spot, but you might be left with some 45, 50 footer that, has a ton of break and, won't stop, where you might know, okay, this might be a good one to be aggressive to. And it's okay to kind of be short sighted because you're pitching back up into the hill or something like that. So I think there's just a lot more kind of uh, game planning and scheming of where are the good spots to miss.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I would say I probably do a little more prep work in the handful of majors that I've played. And yeah, I would assume that's gonna kind of be the same next week. I'll try and get there on Sunday after the event here and go play a few times. And again, hopefully the weather kind of stays away.
Yeah, well, I will say this, and then we can talk more about some of the fun stuff, but, um, looking at your accuracy stats, I think there's, like, a very easy and straightforward pathway for you to have a really strong week based on your ability to hit fairways and lag putt. Like, I think that those are going to, not that you need me to tell you this, but I think those are the 2 things that if you do well, at least from a data perspective, you're gonna have a significant advantage over, like, the average player playing, because I think at a golf course like Oakmont, off the tee, step 1, you either need to be incredibly straight or incredibly long, and if you don't have either one of those 2, you're, like, so far behind the 8 ball compared to the guys that are either hitting a million fairways and always playing from the fairways, or the guys that are just up, like, a bit,
Yeah.
because you're gonna miss some fairways too. Like, the fairways are narrow enough to the point where there's gonna be some holes where the accurate drivers are gonna miss some fairways too,
Yeah.
and then the distance guys have an edge. And then the other thing is I do think you can separate with your lag putting here. Like, I look at this golf course, and it is the type of course that I think the good putters are going to 2 putt from 60 feet, and the bad putters may 4 putt. Like, there's some slopes on
Yeah.
these greens where you could putt and the ball could roll back to your feet. Like, the
Yeah.
drivable par 4 on the front 9, watching that in the final round, like, guys would get their drive within 15 feet of the hole, and then it would come back to their feet and they'd make six. So, I mean, not that you need to hear it from me, but I think if you hit a bunch of fairways and are, like, focused on being one of the best lag putters in the field, it's a good spot for you.
Yeah, yeah. I'm excited. I think I've always wanted to, the last couple US Opens there, I just kind of barely missed. And it really is kind of one of the handful of courses that I would like associate with, like, when somebody says a US Open, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, that's definitely on the short list of like where you think about initially, where those are held. So I'm excited to see it.
All right. So, I we were talking a little bit before we went hot. I checked out Tree Farm for the first time in November with our mutual friends. I had a phenomenal weekend there, and I know that you've probably been glazed quite a bit on this golf course and have spoken a lot and answered a lot of questions. But there are a few things that I was specifically curious about just based on my experience, and I will give you my takeaway from the place, and the main thing I walked away from that place, outside of even just the actual nuts and bolts of the architecture of the golf course, but it felt like a place that was very much molded and inspired by, like, a lot of travel. And it seemed like to me Tree Farm is this, like, great combination of all these golf courses that you have seen before and influenced you, and, like, there were all these little things and nuances and things I picked up on where I was like, "Oh, that little touch reminds me of this place, and that little touch reminds me of this place." What were, like, some of the big ones for you in terms of, like, you visited this place and you were like, "I wanna grab and steal a little bit of this and bring it to Tree Farm"?
I think that was definitely the idea, especially going in. I had a long list of places that I had
I
seen and
imagine.
and liked stuff from. And I've said this to people before. You know, before I was working with Kai at the tree farm, I always kind of envisioned, building this golf course and saying, "Hey, we should build a, green like I saw X here." And he kind of taught me that it's really more like, "Hey, let's go find the green sites and then just kind of do what fits there." Versus, I was kind of, envisioning it the other way. So there wasn't honestly a ton of specific things that we, pulled and tried to do. It was just kind of, certain things when we got onto certain places in the property that, when we started shaping a green or thinking about where the hole was going to go and how it was going to play, that influenced, certain things. Um, like the third green, for example, we kind of tried to mimic certain things from like 14 at Augusta.
Yeah.
Uh, with the way that kind of front kind of repels it. We didn't want to copy it exactly and try and build the 14th green, but we wanted to pull little things here and there from it. And like the first hole, there were for a long time, we were trying to make like that eighth hole at St. George's Hill.
Never
Like,
played it, but David mentioned that immediately.
yeah. So, we went through a bunch of variations and it just kind of wasn't working. And then we just kind of did our own thing. But again, that was kind of like what inspired, some of the looks or how the green was, or, just certain things, the way it kind of steps up a little bit. And there's that second tier. You look at back at, some old photos and there's some stuff kind of like that going on. Um, and then obviously, you get to like the Redan or something like that. And, there was some North Barrick kind of
Yeah.
inspiration and
It's a very good Redan, I would add. Like
yeah,
I think that it ended up being on the perfect land for that shot shape. Like not all there are a lot of Redans where you end up getting to the tee and it's like I'm just going to hit the ball high because like whatever. And it's really a Redan where you like want to run it in there.
yeah. And that's kind of what Tom said when he was, working on the routing, was that, hey, this sets up perfect for that if you want to do it. I'm not sure if you're into that sort of thing or not, but, you could do it here if you wanted. And, you know, when we were building that hole, I had kind of told Kai I wanted a somewhat of a modern twist on it. I wanted it a little longer, which maybe it plays a little too long certain days.
I don't know, man. Like I've heard the criticisms because people are already going nuts about the 280-yard par three at Oakmont. Like some of the best one shotters in the world are long golf holes. Like
Yeah,
even the second par four on the front at Tree Farm. How long's that golf hole? That's like 240.
yeah, yeah. That one kind of was inspired by five at Pine
Pine
Valley.
Valley.
Um,
Yep.
you
Yep.
know, that one's really good. And again, we didn't want to just go carbon copy, like, facsimile every bunker and make it exactly the same way. But, it's got the kind of heavy tilt in the green, and you can kind of see that it's pretty similar elevations and stuff like that. And then we built that back tee that was kind of meant to mimic, like, I don't know, when Pine Valley opened, like 1930s sometime, and it was 225 yards back then or something. And it was like, man, that was a beast,
It's a driver. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we wanted to build a tee that was like 280. So we got that 280 or 285 tee that's back in the trees that, it's fun to play if you can do it. And, you feel really rewarded. And I remember when we were kind of talking about building that hole, I wasn't sure if I wanted to build five at Pine Valley. I had written to Tom that it was kind of one of my favorite par threes, just from the standpoint that it's a very kind of do or die shot, and you don't really see that often on a hole that, you know, isn't short.
Yeah.
And when we were kind of working on it initially, we had, you know, I had sketched out some, you know, should we do some sort of fairway out to the left where you could bail out? And I remember him kind of talking about like, you know, reminding me like what makes five so great is, you know, you feel so accomplished when you actually pull off the shot and hit the green and you don't have a place to bail out. So, you know, there were a ton of pulls, you know, like 18 wanted it to be drivable, kind of
18
like,
rules. 18 is my favorite hole on the golf course.
yeah,
I think that having a finishing hole where the delta of what can happen in matches needs to be extreme. It needs to feel like you can pick up a big swing can happen in the match, and like 18 has that in such a cool way.
yeah, I mean, we see I think there's been 3 or 4 hole in ones on that hole, and, you know, we see people make doubles all the
Yeah,
time, because the green can be, I would say, one of the most challenging on the course, just,
yeah,
especially if you it's one of the very few greens on the course that if you get a lower pin and you happen to hit it up top, you can be in like serious trouble and not be able to get one close. There's no real help to kind of you know, backboard one off of or anything like that. You're just kind of like, man, like, you know, I'm in a bad spot. So you see, like you said, the variance in scoring. And I think honestly throughout the golf course, it's kind of like that. There's like high levels of variance, which to me, that was always like the goal. And that's what makes golf fun to me is you can go make a two on number one or a one on number one day, and you can also make a five like later in the afternoon, and you kind of get that throughout the whole golf course. Because there's, you know, there's similar to like what we were talking about with Oakmont. There's room to run the ball up. There's room to kind of escape trouble if you get in the wrong spot and use the ground to kind of feed balls in. Um, but then if you miss, you know, you got to kind of make that decision of, am I trying to make par and bring double into play, or do I just kind of accept bogey and move on? So
yeah. I I I mean, there are a million more things that I would wanna talk to you about the specific golf course. I don't wanna just go through every hole and be like, "That was awesome. This is awesome." I'm sure you hear that quite a bit, but one of the things I was also curious about, because I think about this a lot, and, like, I'm asking you this question as somebody who has, like, already successfully owned and created one of these clubs, but, like, what do you make of the explosion of all of these destination clubs? Like, it feels like even since Tree Farm, there's, like, 15 more that are, like, either in construction right now to be built or are popping up, and one part of me is like, this is a bummer because I think that this is like what's happening at these destination clubs is like at the forefront of architecture right now. Like some of the best modern designs that are happening right now are at these destination clubs that like 1% of the population is going to ever see. Um, and then the other part is like, even in the public space, all of the boom in public golf is happening at destinations too. Like all of the best public golf architecture that's being built, that's often being built in remote locations as part of a resort. Like where do you where do you land on all of that stuff? Like has that surprised you that that just seems to be where we're going, where it's now all about these weekend trips? Because it feels like something's changing culturally that it didn't used to be this way. It felt like 5 or 10 years ago.
yeah, I think, I mean, a lot of it I think just comes down to money. You know, it's really expensive to build golf. You know, so even on the public side, it's like developers aren't building places to just not have a return on their investment, right? So I think from the a lot of the places getting built kind of capturing full wallet share, being at resorts where, you know, you're staying and eating and playing a couple of different golf courses, a couple of different rounds. just kind of goes to show that that's how they, that's how they're able to do it. You don't have a lot of people just kind of forking over, 10 or $15 million just to build a cool golf course just to hope people come and play it. I think there's obviously certain cases where stuff like that happens, like at Landman. Obviously, they pulled that off, and you have certain scenarios where that stuff works, but primarily, I think it's people kind of looking at it like it costs a lot of money to hire one of these really good architects that everyone has heard of and knows, and cost a lot to build the golf course and maintain the golf course. Um, so golf's hard. It's such a uh, small percentage of people that, like you said, can even afford to go
Yeah.
join or play a lot of these places, which sucks. But hopefully, maybe they meet somebody in their travels or meet somebody somewhere that's able to take them, and they're all built to be kind of played and shared and enjoyed. So
Yeah.
um, it's always a fine line that we've had to deal with at the tree farm, and I'm sure everybody kind of deals with everywhere of who's getting to play it, who did we build it for, it's too expensive, everything.
You're gonna get that. I think some of that stuff feels like a bit of a no-win to me, but the conversation
Yeah,
for
totally.
another day. Yeah. I mean, if you what you know now and what you've learned now spending some time operating the tree farm, like, is there anything you would go back and do differently now after seeing it function for how long has it officially been open? A little over a year now?
The golf course has been open since kind of the spring of 23.
Yeah.
So kind of 3 full seasons, I would say, of golf, and then
Housing
the
came in the
lodging
last
and
year. Yeah.
clubhouse kind of food and beverage operation has been open since November. So, we're still in the like super, super early days of seeing how the members kind of use the club, and the staff operating out of it and everything like that. And I think it was a really nice season for us, and we learned a lot. And I think most people that I've talked to have enjoyed the experience that the staff's kind of pulling off, which is that was what it was all about for me. So
I will
uh,
say this about the main room that you guys have recently developed. You know the one I'm talking about where everybody eats kind of together.
yeah,
It reminds me actually like a little bit of kind of the big bar area in Cal Club and that big bar area in Bel Air, where it's kind of like this congregation space for everybody after a round. And I love clubs that have that personally. I like clubs that have a little bit of culture where you can step off the golf course and you're actually going to be able to meet some people. And that's what I did at Tree Farm is like we ended up it was the coldest weekend of the year. We went in the middle of November, a week before Thanksgiving. And that room like, I ended up meeting, like, all of these people that, like, I kind of, like, knew friends of friends and, like, all these people fr there are people from Chicago and people from Charlotte, and I was coming from Los Angeles, and David was all these people from, like, different clubs and different areas of the country, and it was cool. Like, not a lot of clubs pull that off well. You can feel like strangers passing in the night sometimes with other members, and particularly at destination clubs, sometimes it's like bring your own game and then focus on the guests that you're bringing. Whereas that weekend, it wasn't like it was David was bringing me, but then showing me like all of his friends there. And that's not always the case at other destination clubs. So I will say, I think that part is going well with Tree Farm, and at least my experience.
yeah, and that was very intentional. That room was like that was definitely the plan, was to get everybody together and kind of get that very social aspect, like you said, at a club where the people are from all over, and you might not know every single member, and you definitely don't know every single guest that these people are
Yeah.
bringing. It does afford a cool opportunity, if you're the right type of person that can go talk to people that you maybe
Right.
don't know. And that's what I was after, and that was kind of my goal, was to have a room that, you might see a bunch of people, like you said, that a friend of a friend, and he knows that you were there and wanted to say hi and talk about the round and ask you what you thought of the golf course or whatever. And that whole area and the patio and outside and everything, I think kind of pulls that together really well.
One or two more questions, and then we'll get you out of here. You got a big round tomorrow too, but um, would you ever do it again? Like, would you ever think about running it back with a new piece of property in a different place, or even adding to the tree farm? Like, would you guys ever build a second course there or something like that?
Yeah, I think yeah to both for sure. At the tree farm, it's always something that we're always, wanting to look at, or wanting to do, and always looking at, is kind of adding more. And we put so much focus, I would say, last year, especially just kind of buttoning everything up and getting the golf, dialed in, and getting the lodging and the buildings kind of on board and open for everybody to kind of have that full experience. And now we've kind of spent the last handful of months figuring out like what is next.
Yeah.
So another course, whether it's a full course or kind of a short course, I don't know how many holes, is definitely, like, forefront of what we hope to pull off, which I think will be a nice little kind of auxiliary option for people, regardless of what it is. And then, yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to do one in Utah.
Yeah.
That was always the
Is
original
there
thought.
good land for golf there though? Like,
Yeah, but again, it starts getting remote. It's
yeah,
an hour or two outside of Salt Lake, and the season in Utah is already kind of short. But yeah, there's a few places that we've been looking at that, there's one in particular that I think like would immediately be like a top 50 golf course in the,
just based on the site.
yeah, I mean, it's just so good, that.
And would you wanna work back with Kai again? Like, would you wanna run it back with the same squad or maybe try someone else out?
No, I mean, I loved working, with Kai. I mean, he was so, like, helpful of just teaching me. Just,
Yeah.
I told you earlier, I had my kind of thought of how it would go, and my ideas, and he was really, helpful and educational on, not just telling me, no, we can't do that, saying like, that won't work because this, and you need to think about this, this, and this, and that's why we might have to go a different direction. So I really enjoyed kind of everything, we did. So yeah, I mean, it would be cool to, I think, do a few golf courses, and do one with him, and maybe do one with somebody else or something like that. And there's definitely room, at where I would hope to do it, to do something like that. But yeah, Kai was the best.
Well, I think the golf course is great, but I also think you, like, ha knocked it out of the park on, like, some of, like, the smaller things that you don't think about mattering, but like, great pro shop. Like, it's just a great pro shop. It's a great logo. I'm sure the pro shop makes a lot of money because you guys have, like, an awesome logo. Great head pro. Drew's awesome. Like, I played 9 holes with him. He's the fucking man. Like, he's a great dude. Um, and like, amazing breakfast sandwich, and you'd say that stuff, like, but seriously, every place needs to have, like, an amazing burger, an amazing breakfast sandwich. After that, like, it doesn't matter as much, but if you get those 2 things right, and I remember being like, "Oh, this breakfast croissant is fucking unbelievable." So, the little things are appreciated, I will say, from somebody that spends a lot of time traveling and loving to go check out new places. It's a special place, man. It's a really great spot, and I tell that to everybody who asks me. So, hope to see it again soon, and super excited for what it could possibly become as well. My final question for you, I'm curious, are there any other guys on the PGA Tour that, like, care about seeing great golf courses? Like, is there anybody on tour that you could be like, "Dude, like, we're in New York this week, like, wanna try and see if we can, like, get on Winged Foot or Fisher's Island or something like that?" Or do those guys, like, just not care? It's just competition mode.
I think there is definitely a group of people that do. I also think it's become a lot more, I don't know if popular is the right word or accessible is the right word, but just with Instagram and everything like that, I think seeing different places and seeing pictures of cool places is just easier, and it's easier to understand where they are, and oh, I know a member there or whatever. So I definitely like Patrick Rogers is somebody that comes to mind.
That's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that.
Yeah, that
It's
he's
cool.
always, I would say he's always interested in what's going on, or where's a really cool place that he just saw, or if I've played anywhere cool. Um, Johnson Wagner was somebody that I played a lot with him my first couple of years
Yeah.
on tour, and he was one of the very few, I would say, like my rookie or first couple of years, like I said, that even like knew what I was talking about, or like wanting to go see some of these places. And now you see all the you see a lot of people going to play cool places now. You see Ricky and Jordan and JT going to Pine
Yeah.
Valley, and stuff like that, and that's obviously a really cool place. But obviously a super like household name, right? Like
Yeah.
anyone in the golf world, I would say, like at that level, is going to know what that place is. But
Have you brought any guys to Tree Farm from the tour?
so Kevin Kisner and Luke List and Henrik Norlander are all members.
Sick.
Um,
It's
yeah,
awesome.
they go out like when we invited them, it was kind of like, oh, they might come out like once a year, like they obviously are from the area, and we felt like would be kind of like good people to be associated with the club, and felt like it was a fun enough golf course for them to kind of relax and kind of let loose and bring their friends out or whatever. But it is really cool to see them out there, and Luke goes out a lot, and Henrik goes out a lot, and Kevin goes out a lot, and it's just cool to kind of see them just be like members out
Yeah.
there. They I think the membership kind of respects that they're who they are, and
Yeah.
not super bugging them and asking them about when they're playing their next event or how they played last week. They just kind of let them be them. But at the same time, I feel like all of those guys, would chop it up with anybody, uh, if the circumstance kind of like got to that point,
I
and be totally
imagine.
okay
Yeah.
with it. So they've been really, really cool and great. And then I'm trying to think. There's been a bunch of people that have gone out and play. Willie Wilcox goes out quite a bit.
Yeah, I've seen him post about it a couple of times. He's
Yeah,
he's he's a great character. I
yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
So it seems like anytime he's kind of it's just in that neck of the woods, he always sees if it's possible to come out. But I've kind of welcomed anybody that wants to come see it out here. I always tell people if they're ever in the area to come check it out, because I think it's a golf course that, like, I would think good players enjoy playing.
Yes.
There's a lot of different looks. It requires um, I think the thing that really sets it apart for good players is it really does require like excellent golf shots to get close. It doesn't mean that you can't. You doesn't mean you have to be like an elite player to play good out there. But I think there are some like really like razor sharp uh, like situations
And
out there.
it's throughout the bag too, so it's like there's a couple, like, super high leverage long iron shots, but it's not like you have a long iron in your hands all day, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, the
Yeah.
par 4s, most of them, is like there's a variety where you're hitting some par 4s, you're hitting 8 and 9 irons in, some are wedges, and then a few are long irons. Like, you I guess what I'm trying to say less eloquently is you don't need to be necessarily perfect at one thing, but it kinda tests throughout the bag.
Yeah, and I think there's a handful of greens that kind of, run away a little bit, so you really have to, like, hit it right and strike it good to get balls really, really close. That's what I've found out there is, there's a handful of places where, some backstops or some backboards or whatever might help you kind of funnel a shot in if you do it right or maybe even just get lucky. But then there's just a lot of holes that just require you to just actually execute a really good shot.
12, for example,
Yeah,
like, that was the first one that immediately came to mind, like, you have to be so precise with your approach shot on 12.
yeah. Um, So, yeah, I think it's just been cool. It's been cool to get people out there and see it and, super friendly off the tee, so really, like, anyone can play out there, and
Yeah.
then the fact that you can run the ball in on virtually, 14 or 15 of the golf holes, you could hit a driver into if you
Yeah.
really needed to,
Yeah.
um, make it and then all the short grass, like, there's no rough, so it's
Really
basically.
good playing conditions too, like, I meant
Yeah.
to also give a shout out to your agronomy staff because and I don't play a lot of golf in the Southeast, like, I live in LA, and most of the golf I play is either Northeast, or California, so I'm not super familiar with, like, what is typical playing conditions in the Southeast. It was awesome, dude. Like, on that trip, we did Congaree and Old Barnwell too, and, like, all of those golf courses, the way you had that short grass in November, it played, like, beautifully.
Yeah, Nick Roth's our, super there, and he is really, really, really good. And he came from, Oakland Hills, so definitely, like, not Bermuda, I don't think
Is
he'd
it
ever.
is it overseeded Bermuda? The playing
No, it's the
surface?
home of 31, we just let it go dormant, and, it obviously, um, only is like that in the winter, the fall or whatever, but it's really cool. He works super hard, and he's been there since construction, kind of working with Kai. So, he works as hard as anybody I've ever met. So he does a really good job of presenting it. Like he understands that people, uh, like it's a new batch of people like every day and every couple of days, and they might only be there once or twice a year, and I feel like he takes a lot of pride into making sure that place shines kind of day in and day out.
Yeah. Well, A plus for me, man. I can't wait to play it again in my travels, and hopefully we can get out there sometime shortly as well. That's it for me, buddy. Good luck tomorrow, man.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll be rooting for you tomorrow in Canada, and even more so at Oakmont, man.
I appreciate it.
You got it, Zach. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.